I suppose, ethical problems in the sort of, I suppose, limitation of voices to, I suppose, white people.
Yes, that was something that like we considered while making the film, and it's something that was very much on our mind while editing it. But I think the fact that the film, rather than pretending to be the universal like perspective, incorporating the proper cross-section of society's attitude toward this experience, even though we could have gone that way with the film, I think that it ultimately would have been a bit deceptive to go that way, because ultimately it's our belief that in documentaries objectivity is kind of an illusion. Like, it's something that you can always strive for at the most, but the best way to achieve some degree of objectivity is to be instead as candid as possible with your subjectivity, because that's an inescapable part of it, I'd say.
And we weren't interested in making like a Michael Moore documentary and having a lesson at the end of the day to prescribe. And so even though Lorenzo's the director, and clearly, as you can see there, did not appreciate the experience in the moment to the fullest extent, but mellowed in the editorial process, and that was, for me, and James, the other editor, a really important thing to acknowledge. And the final line of the film is, you're looking for reasons not to see the value, and ensuring that even though you've got to embrace and acknowledge the subjectivity, you've also got to criticise the limitations of your own experience within that.
And to build on that, it's something that like since watching the film like so many times since we completed it a couple of years back, I mean, my attitude toward the experience has evolved into one of recognizing that, I think like Callum probably says it best toward the end of the film, that a lot of your own personal enjoyment will taint or elevate the quality of the experience while you're there. But yeah, I think that it's not necessarily like valueless. Like, I think that there's still a lot that comes out from people being there, even if it's not deeply as intellectual as a straight upward trajectory in English. I think that in the trajectory of a lot of these, I guess a lot of these volunteers is one where a lot of them have very strong social justice inclinations, and I think like our rearing, both the high school that we all went to beforehand and the lessons that were imparted about like substantially contributing, as I say, solidarity not for solidarity's sake, even then, like leading to a tangible means. I think that's something I see in everybody, both in the film and outside of it. So, yeah. Anybody else? That's something. Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Just a question, like at the start when you're talking about these programs and the way that they're advertising it, for people to get involved, like, the Kenyan orphan miniatures, and you kind of had this like dark humor to your approach, you kind of, even though you were doing something similar, you saw it in a really kind of, I don't know, like, I had that similar sense of humor, so I get it. But if your visions are for something like this to happen, but you have all these questions with it, I mean, is there a solution you see in terms of like coming through it, like having programs like this that aren't using their media forms to manipulate the situation to be like, yeah, experience saving the poverty, but instead actually get to the grim of it? Is there like a step forward you see happening?
I think that with regards to this program in particular, what made it somewhat disenchanting was that I feel as though the volunteers before they left weren't as well equipped to deal with the situation. Like, as you saw throughout consistently, discipline was perhaps our weakest element. Rapport with the students probably our strongest, in that they all just loved having us around. But I think that like programs like this, as I said, aren't totally valueless. I think that this program has made earnest strides in order to better the quality or preparation of teachers prior to them going to Thailand. And I think that there are some, like, for example, if the group of German people came through and stuff, like, I think they would have really cleaned up like a lot of the classes and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think, and to address the first part of your question, which was about the dark humor, this is something that Jono and I can speak to, in that that opening scene is very alienating. Like, when I showed this, I go to uni right now in the US, and I showed it to an audience there, and one of my really good friends just shouted, "Oh, fuck off," like at the back, because he knew it. It's just like, it's the most alienating way that he knows me personally, could have started it. And I think the reason we did it was because we wanted, as I said, about being candid with your subjectivity, we wanted to make it clear that it's not some omniscient, like, godlike narrator who's in the background, and just like making this very clear and clean message about it, that it's just as messy a perspective to come from. And the fact that I have a lot of, like, I think that I approached it with somewhat in earnest, somewhat with cynicism, and capturing that balance was something we tried to do throughout. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, the first scene is a kind of direct mirror of the final scene, where the first scene quite literally ends with Callum, one of the volunteers, calling Lorenzo out for his myopia, his short-sightedness. So yeah, there was, but though in different ways. So the first instance is supposed to be kind of humorous and mocking, and the final way is supposed to be more sincere there. So I think there's a bit of a trajectory in the film where some of the darker humorous elements die away a little bit towards the end. As it
I think
becomes
something
more-
I noticed was like there was almost like an expectation that you guys had with this program, and perhaps what I saw through it was that you more had like a buddy experience where you became these students like buddy, like as someone to like not just teach them in the classroom, but give them the demonstration of what it's like to have a white friend, or to have a friend from another country, or to have a friend that doesn't speak their language. And perhaps what needs tweaking, just like coming from my perspective, having watched it, is that to have that clearer in your program. If you don't have the training to be a teacher or to be in a classroom and you're kind of doing it to give your time, to approach it more like come and teach them, but don't expect to, you know, change their whole grammar and everything, but just be someone in their life. Because at the end when you said, oh, they might not even remember me, I kind of called bullshit, because I was like, nah, they probably will remember you forever. Like, I remember meeting people at my school from other cultures that came in, whether it be like Papua New Guinea or something, and like it has outstanding effects on children when they meet people that are, you know, adulting, but also like, you know, they dedicate their time, you know. So I found like that was a really, like it was, yeah, I kind of wanted to say that to you. It was like, no, actually I think you are making a huge difference, just the expectation you had due to your intellect and your desire to want to change things was not mirroring it. So I don't know if that's your kind of take as well, but that's how I kind of
I think, yeah, that's a...
interpreted it.
No, that's a good view.
I guess that wasn't really a question, it was more a comment. Sorry.
No, it's
But yeah, no, I feel like it was really interesting what you did there. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really have an opinion on the program for or against beforehand, and that was my role, essentially trying to be as neutral as possible to ensure the most, well, we talk about objectivity, but the most balanced product was created at the end of the day. And as you can see in my very brief cameo, not really saying much, but just being an ear for Lorenzo to talk to throughout the filming experience. Yeah, in terms of if I have perspective on it now, I think these programs can offer a tremendous amount of value when the people have the right training. I think that's probably what's exposed here, is how naive and idealistic the students were at the start, not really knowing about, well, not learning the language, not having lessons in the language and that sort of thing. So I think, yeah, a lot of the feedback that we've had from other people who've done this program afterwards, beforehand, who really liked and appreciated the film, was that even though in many respects can be viewed as being quite critical, has led to some changes within the program to try and make it better and to clear up the expectations and to give some extra training in language and that sort of thing. So yeah, I still don't know if I have a definitive opinion either way, but I guess that's where I fall now.
Yeah, and to add to that, besides the improvement of the actual program's quality, it's actually really interesting because a lot of the initial audience of this film were people who could have gone on the exact same program, coming from similar backgrounds to the characters and myself in the film. And they weren't deterred by the film, by what it had to say. If anything, it inspired a lot more, I'd say, like zeal and less naivety perhaps and the recognition that this isn't going to be a drunken like junket or something like that. So
yeah, I did hear that the year before we released this online for a little bit, there was a very low uptake, and then after it was released there was a very high uptake, and partly I heard inspired by people watching it and wanting to kind of see for themselves, I suppose.
Well, just one comment on that. Obviously, knowing most all the boys in that, my sense is a significant number go back 2-3 times, and I think that relational side, which connects with some and not with others, and a number of them are, for example, supporting students. That some of the girls have gone on to college, things like that. I think there are, especially through modern media, there's an opportunity for that relational side to grow and continue, and I think that's one of the difference. You made a comment at one stage during that, we'll never go back, we'll forget, you know, the comment about knowing and impact. I think for both some of the kids over there as well as the boys that have gone there, it has become relational, and I can see them, some of them going back for the next 10-20 years regularly. And I think that's one of the strengths of actually living in a village, becoming part of a community. That's perhaps quite separate from the teaching English, but is an important part of it.
Right. I actually agree with you with what you say there. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was trying to catch up with a bunch of the people you saw there, because it's been over at least a year since I've seen most of them, and they were back in Thailand again visiting, and I agree that that whole relational side, if this were 6 years to salvation, let's say, there would be a thread of the people returning and reconnecting. They dedicate, like, some of the people from this group go back at least once a year. And as you say, one of the people we interviewed, Oranich, some of the people in the film, like, helped partially subsidize her university education. So if there was a lot of cynicism that came out at the start of the film about what is the material contribution being made, or, like, is this merely solidarity for solidarity's sake? Yeah, like, time has humbled me in a more accepting way of that. No, the material impact, it's more slow coming, let's say, but this provided at least that relational impact at first to start it. Yes.
Of those people that you met up with again recently who had stayed the full 12 months, did they have a different perspective?
Yes, the Callum, who was in the film, it's really interesting because throughout the second half of the year, when I started working on this, I kind of left with the expectation that not much would change significantly, but from what I understand, come month 11 or month 12, the learning curve with them knowing Thai is very steep, and they're having not just undisciplined classrooms, but conversations with kids about their families and where they're from and stuff like that. And I admit that it's a bit of a shame that it kicks in their final month or in the later stages, but then again, that may just be an inevitability you have to accept. But yeah, the attitudes changed and evolved in a couple of them. I'd say Callum went from being, as he ended the film saying, I feel the same way. I don't think he feels the same way anymore. I think he says, toward the end, he started to see glimmers of its value, and he's actually somebody who goes back once in a while now to catch up with the community. Yeah. But for the most part, I'd say that the attitudes of every other character remained pretty much consistent. Will listen, like, he probably feels the same way. My view has evolved just by repetition of watching this film. Every time I watch it, I learn, like, rethink it again, and I realize I may have been a bit harsh. But yeah, that's how the opinions evolved first. So yeah.
Just, I guess, coming from a different perspective, I had a moment watching this where I realized that, like, you guys were all boys. And from a female perspective, I was almost intrigued, like, I didn't know whether the German girls were going to rock up or not, and I was kind of excited for, like, their energy to be on screen. I was like, yeah, sick, like, let's see what the chicks do. And I had this, like, kind of thought of, like, you know, while I try to not see gender, I've done gender studies, and I understand the dynamics, and to see it on film, to see this group of boys, especially the scene with the fire, you know, and I was kind of like had this like, I always had this envy of these like boys trips, you know, where like the brothers sit down, there's this fire element and there's this real like, and when you're like out in the fields and stuff, you're doing this work and this bonding. It's quite raw, but what it would have been like to be a female participant, or to even add a female into the group of volunteers and have just one chick and the rest boys, or even to have mixed. And I thought it was interesting just witnessing like the experience of, obviously you're all very intellectual, you're humanitarian driven men, or boys becoming men, you know, and trying to teach children who are female and male. And I don't know, how is your perspective now of like how different it would be if there was like, you know, more females involved in your experience?
There's no need to speculate because the program actually takes women now as well.
Yeah.
As part of it. But I think that the film, at first when this program was starting, admittedly there are just other social pressures beyond it that make, you know, parents of a 17 or 18-year-old girl who's just finished the HSC in schoolies or the HSC being the New South Wales equivalent of the VCE, like that. Obviously, it's just like harder for like parents are less likely to do that for a young girl, rather than like, you know, people like just being like, oh, the boys will be fine instead if they go overseas. And yeah, that like it still like exists to this day, unfortunately, but that's one pressure beyond it. As to how would the film have been different, because this film is I think this film is is like intellectual in such a way that like, I mean, I think that irrespective of which genders were being represented, the same questions would have been asked. Maybe there was some sort of masculine element to people trying to intellectually one-up each other as part of it, but I don't know, like, I believe that it would have been a very similar film.
We should probably end it
Unless,
here, unless there's one more question.
I just have one more, just in the comment your mate makes about like it being our film, like not your film, our film. I thought that was really cool in a way, because do you think possibly you having the camera and having the project and saying that you're making this documentary perhaps lifted morale through their experience? Because they were like, well, you know, at the end of the day, whatever's like being done here, there's this kind of project and the undertow of it, which, you know, could create something for people, either inspire or change something. You know, was there kind of, do you feel like you helped in a way being there?
I think with regards to morale boosting, this film probably wasn't the best for it, in the sense that I think the fact that I wanted to make this film made people think more critically about it in a way that, in addition to like making them more critical and just like discerning of the impact of the experience, it obviously caused a lot less naivety.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because I think to this day, some of the people you see in this film have seen it a lot of times. Like James has seen it, he says, like 4 times over the years, and sometimes they watch it almost to remember the experience and such. And I think that they appreciate it from that perspective, even if it was Lorenzo just filming hard questions being asked. So, yeah.
Cool.
Thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
We'll let Guido have their theatre back.